Learn how to build and use this fret beveling file and more next at plankandplane.com. To get started, I cut a piece of 2x2 pine at 35 degrees using the bandsaw. Next, I ripped a piece of 3/4 inch wide pine to a thickness slightly thinner than the thickness of my file. I'll stick this piece of thin wood to the beveled 2x2 with a piece of double-faced tape. The purpose of this piece of wood is to hold the file into position on the beveled 2x2 and also act as a spacer for a third piece of wood that will be screwed to the beveled piece of 2x2 to clamp the file in place. If you notice right here, I've made 2 marks on the 2x2, and they are about half the width of the file away from the edge, and this is where I'll position the piece of wood so that when the file butts up against it, the file will overhang the edge of the 2x2 about by half the width of the file. And one other thing that I did that I didn't show in the video was to cut the tang off the file, and you'll see right here is the file and the piece that I cut off of it. The way that I did that was just to take a hacksaw and score the file. The file's hardened steel, you really can't cut it, but you can score it with a hacksaw. And then I clamped it between 2 pieces of wood right on that scored mark and took a hammer and just tapped on the tang, and it snapped off where I had scored it. Next, I cut the fret beveling tool to length, and I cut it just slightly longer than the piece of file that I had cut off. The commercial fret beveling file that I saw that I based this on, I believe is 7.5 inches long. The length really isn't critical, it just needs to be as long or slightly longer than the piece of file that you're using. And I did cut this one off to 7.5 inches long. I took the cut off from trimming the fret beveling tool to length and ripped a piece off the back of it to use to clamp the file onto the fret beveling tool. So what you see in this video is actually the cut off from the beveling tool, not the beveling tool itself. Next, I just got 4 screws and 4 washers out of my parts bin to fasten this piece of wood onto the fret beveling tool. And building this thing, you know, the screw size isn't really critical, just something that's large enough to hold the file in place. Here again, I'm using that double-faced tape, this time to hold this third piece of wood onto the spacer. Just hold it in place until I can drill the holes for the screws. Here you can see how the screws will hold the whole assembly together. I drew a line so the screws will fall down the center line of the spacer, and then I just made 4 equally distant marks on the outer piece of wood where I'll drill the 4 holes for the screws. I didn't videotape drilling the holes. I didn't think you needed to take your time to watch that, so I have the holes drilled, the 4 screws ready to be put into the tool. Next, I'll insert the file and tighten down the screws. So here's the finished fret beveling tool. The file is held firmly in the tool, and other than buying the file, everything else was made from scraps that I had or screws that I had on hand. And what I didn't say at the beginning of this video was the commercial version of this same file is $68.11. Here I've begun filing the frets. I have the guitar neck clamped to my table, and I have it up on blocks so that the headstock of the neck is parallel with the tabletop, and then I just clamped it to a stack of blocks. You can see already the filings that the file is starting to generate. I'll get a close-up of one of the fret ends here so you can see what it looks like at this point. This is a little blurry, but you can see here on the left-hand side that the fret is starting to develop a bevel, and the other end of the fret on the right-hand side is still at a 90-degree angle. So it's just a matter of continuing to file the ends of the frets until I get them down to a point where I want them. I don't want to go too far, or you'll start filing into the edge of the fretboard itself, so you don't want to go any farther than that. But I'll finish up here on the left side or the top side of the fretboard and then work on the other side of the frets. Here's a view of the fretboard with the frets beveled on both sides. They're pretty much done. As far as beveling, I may need to touch them up a little bit, but they're pretty well there. This tool that I built, the bevel angle was 35 degrees. You can do the bevel anywhere from 35 to 45 degrees. It's really a matter of personal preference, and I've seen different luthiers do anywhere from 35 to 45. I don't think I would go past 45. I did mine at 35. The tool that I based my bevel tool on was 35 degrees, and I think that's a good angle. Next, I'll move on to dressing the fret ends, and this is a Stuart McDonald fret dressing file, and it's a thin, fine file. And what makes it special is on the two thin edges, one edge is ground flat and the other edge is ground smooth and slightly rounded. So when you file or dress the ends of your frets, that edge can rest against the edge of your fretboard, and that rounded edge won't damage the fretboard. Where if you use just a small regular file that had milling file marks on the thin edges of the file, you would dig into the fretboard if you weren't very careful. So there's some tools that you can make, some tools that you can buy, and really to dress the ends of the frets, this is a tool that I feel like I needed to buy. It's not terribly expensive, and it's kind of a specialized tool, but it does the job. So I still have a ways to go on dressing these fret ends, but I wanted to show you just basically how this file works. You just kind of file and roll over the edges of the fret where the sharp edge is caused by the bevel, and just keep on filing them until they're rounded over on the edges, and you can run your finger across them and they feel smooth. You can see how the rounded, smooth edge of that file tends to ride against the edge of the fretboard. So, you could imagine if you were using just a small regular file, how scarred up the edge of that fretboard would get. Here's a close-up of that fret that I've been filing on. So I still have quite a bit of work to do on these fret ends yet, and I'll continue working on those, and we can see those in a later video how they turn out. So in part 37 of building a tenor guitar, you will see that and how I installed the tuners. And here's a little preview of that. Thanks for watching.